welcome. This is Eric Miskell with EMSNOW, and welcome to this edition of EMSNOW Up Close. It is my pleasure today, to be speaking with Michael Kennedy for the first time. Michael is the Senior Vice President of Global Sales Programs within TTI. TTI, of course, is a specialty distributor of passive interconnect and discrete components. They're actually headquartered here in Fort Worth, so not far from where I live. And they're part of our Berkshire Hathaway company, so part of that kind of corporate umbrella too. So, Michael, welcome. Good to meet you. Thank you for agreeing to speak to me today.
Thanks, Eric. It's great to be here, and I'm glad I've got the opportunity to spend a little time with you.
Absolutely. Why don't we begin by allowing you to kind of introduce yourself and your area of responsibility within TTI?
Sure. So, as you mentioned, I'm the Senior Vice President for Global Sales Programs. What that essentially means is I have responsibility for our largest OEM and EMS customer engagements that have global footprint. Additionally, I've got responsibility for our mil-aero business. I've been with TTI for about 4 years now, and been in the industry for more than 25 years with a few different electronics distributors and supply chain providers. And also had the fortunate opportunity to spend 4 years as an independent board member on a publicly traded EMS provider. And so got some very good insight from that experience as well.
Oh, no doubt. Well, that's good, because I wanted to ask you about EMS, because that's obviously part of our title, EMSNOW. So we always like to kind of hear and report on what's happening there. So why don't we start big picture, kind of what do you see as the major trends impacting the EMS industry these days?
Sure. So, I think there's a number of things that are happening. First off, certainly just the evolution towards more streamlined portfolios of customers that many of the EMS have been working on over the past several years. I think we've seen companies spending a lot more time thinking about what customer base, what vertical markets that they want to be aligned with, and then crafting their portfolios to reflect that. And so we've seen really that evolution towards much more of the long cycle type of businesses, higher mix, a little bit low to mid-size volumes, areas like the aerospace and defense, the medical, transportation businesses, all have really taken a forefront, while some of the other traditional EMS markets around networking and communications and things, while they certainly haven't disappeared, they're much more challenging from a margin contribution standpoint. And so companies are taking a different look at some of that business. In addition to that, I think, the trending that we've seen more recently is around some of the nearshoring opportunities, this wonderful thing called COVID that we've been living through for the last couple of years. And all of the logistics and supply chain challenges that have been created from a myriad of events has forced companies to rethink the strategies that they had employed previously, where it was always about go to the lowest cost country, wherever that is in the world, and don't worry necessarily about getting the product where it needs to be consumed. Now it's really all about where is that product ultimately going to be consumed, and try and put it in a low-cost region, but proximity-wise close to where that consumption takes place.
Yeah. So as a result of that, which are the areas or maybe the regions that you see kind of benefiting from those shifts?
Sure. Absolutely Mexico here in the Americas region. We're seeing both OEMs and EMS beginning to move back into Mexico. As far as programs, projects, et cetera, that will stay in the Americas. Eastern Europe, we were talking earlier, and I mentioned I had just been over in Europe for a couple of weeks, and that was definitely one of the themes that came out speaking with a number of customers, suppliers. Our team in Europe has been that migration into Eastern Europe from programs that had previously been in Asia. And then even in Asia, we've seen some migration created by the tariff scenario a few years ago, out of China into Southeast Asia. Areas like Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam, all really beneficiaries of some of the migrations there.
Do you have any sense or hear anything about India and what's happening there? I saw something this morning, I forget which OEM was moving something from China towards India, I think it was. So
We definitely see migration into India as well. We've got a nice growing business in India currently. And certainly I think that's going to be one of the marketplaces that continues to benefit and outgrow sort of the averages across the world.
Yeah. And actually going back to the Europe part, any sense of the impact that the conflict in Ukraine is having?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. That was one of the ones that I was asking companies while I was there, and most of them have said, it's a little bit muted in terms of the true impact that they see. They know that there's impact. There are concerns about what that impact may be as things like the energy crisis continue, and as we get further towards the fall and the winter months, what happens in terms of Russia and whether they continue to provide both oil as well as the natural gas. That's such a big part of what fuels the energy in areas of Europe. And I think that there is a mounting concern as to the impact that is going to have on not only personal over in that area, but certainly on the industrial production going forward. Past that, not a lot of indication from the companies that we do business with anyway, that they've had significant, I'll say, meaningful revenue or supply chain impact necessarily from the conflict yet.
Yeah, I think there was, and yeah, we spoke earlier. I just did a show yesterday, had to do with kind of the staffing issues and the concerns in labor. Usually in the interviews and surveys we've done, right after supply chain component concerns comes human resource concerns, right? Having enough people, getting people, taking care of the people. And I know, having spoken to some European EMS in the past, that having lost some workers who went back into the Ukraine, the men who are working in the factories in Eastern Europe kind of migrating back. Not on that in the Ukraine specific, but are you sensing in your work that any of the labor challenges within the EMS?
Oh, absolutely. Probably one of in addition to the supply chain challenges that everybody has felt and experienced, labor is right up there, and companies just unable to hire enough people, difficulty finding people, difficulty retaining the workers that they have, the increasing labor rates that they're having to incur because of trying to retain those people, as well as when you have to go out and replace, it comes at a higher cost generally. Yeah. And so I think that all of the companies that we deal with, certainly, and that I deal with personally, they have all stated that as a significant challenge and concern going forward.
Yeah. And just to pick up on another issue that you had mentioned, you referenced kind of the impact on margins. EMS has always been kind of challenged for profitability, kind of low margin work generally, but they seem to be growing out of that in some ways, diversifying, what we used to call diversifying your revenue stream, right? Getting other sources. Any sense of that in your discussions about how that might be changing or having been impacted?
Yeah, I don't know if it's necessarily, well, it's being impacted by some of the rising costs that are out there, and that's having impact. It's certainly the rising inventories that the EMS companies have right now. That's impacting some cash flows and things in that area. I've been really impressed, though, as I watch the evolution of EMS over even the past 5 years, in that, most of the EMS companies, publicly traded, I'm talking about, most of them are now targeting operating incomes in the 4 to 5% range, which a few years ago was pretty unheard of. I mean, maybe a really key top echelon group drove that, but by and large, it was down in the very low single digits. So, the fact that now you're witnessing the companies get financially stronger, again, catering their portfolios to maybe some higher margin businesses, focused on profitability and cash flow. I think it's all very positive for the industry as a whole.
Yeah. And that's a perfect segue into the next question or issue I wanted to ask you about, which are really those verticals. Because when we talk about kind of more higher higher margin verticals, and where EMS is changing from some of their traditional, the 3 Cs kind of things. What are you seeing in these industry verticals, and what impact is that having on your business?
Mhm. Yeah, so certainly on the industry verticals, and I enjoyed reading your article on that recently, and you were spot on in terms of what's out there and what's happening with the verticals in the EMS space that are outsourcing their manufacturing. We certainly see a few key areas. EV continues to be one that is ramping up, and not only the electric vehicle for automotive, but across a broad set of transportation. It's the whole electrification of everything, really, that the EMS are getting involved. EV charging is the other area that's certainly part of that. And as the countries have to build out the infrastructure to support electrification, that's going to remain a big area. Medical is a growing area. Everything from really trying to drive more towards home analysis and usage of that. That's been big. We're seeing a lot of the elective side of things come back after COVID now. So that's picking up again. Aerospace and defense. Defense has been relatively stable and good over the last few years, but even getting stronger now with the conflict in the Ukraine, and with some of the foreign governments beginning to invest more in their defense spending. Commercial aerospace coming back. IoT, been in the press for years now, and that is really continuing to explode as people put sensors on virtually everything. It's all connected nowadays. It's crazy. I mean, every time I go and try and buy something for my household, it's always a question of, do I really want this connected or not? And then the other areas would, kind of smart city, smart home, smart factory. And we talked earlier about the labor challenges, and that's really pushing companies to consider much more around what are they doing to automate, how do they use robotics in their factories or cobots in their factories. And there's just so much opportunity, I think, there that will continue for many years to come, because we have such a broad infrastructure to invest in and to improve upon.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And the other one that I know, it was a colleague of mine in Germany brought up, was the whole agricultural, the agribiz, Agritech. They call it different things these days, but that's just seems to be, these were all those things that you speak just in industrial, as I wrote, right? They didn't fit anywhere. Put it in the industrial sector, right? But so that was always the most diverse sector, with all these things that are now seemingly coming out of there as their own.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you say that, because you're right. It used to get this big group, and it's industrial, and it was a catch-all for a lot of categories. And now, even in our business, we've begun to really break that down into the individual type of markets that represents, whether that be robotics or factory automation or other types of areas. You really do need to track it down to a lower common denominator, so that you can understand what type of products go into those markets and how can you best support it.
Yeah. And again, that leads me to my next issue, which is kind of the unique selling propositions that you bring. How do you adjust to this? Is this utilizing kind of existing kind of historical kind of component type things? Is there an evolution into newer requirements now? What are you seeing? How are you responding?
Yeah, so the traditional value proposition, at least from the TTI side, has always been around investment in inventory and available to sell. And Paul Andrews, when he founded the company, that was the basis, and we've stuck with that over the years, and it's been very successful. I think what we also find more and more is this use of big data in how we analyze our business. We have a tremendous amount of information at our disposal, and we're getting much better at applying data analytics to turn that into intelligence to drive our business and our investments. And our teams are using that much more so than we did in the past. A good example, we look at this recovery of commercial aerospace, and you can't really forecast, how quickly it's going to come back up.
Mhm.
But we know it is coming back up. And we see that in passenger traffic numbers. We know that in the aftermarket that they're going to have to service more planes as the travel picks up. And to try and get ahead of that, one of the things that we've really looked at is, can we go back to pre-COVID, look at the types of products that we were selling then? The platforms really haven't changed dramatically. And can we do some proactive investment in those platforms and the specific products that went into those platforms, so that we are a little bit ahead of the curve and able to support our customers better than if we were waiting until we get that hard order or that forecast to come in.
Mhm. Yeah, that's it. And what impact do you think, the CHIPS Act, what's happened here in this country and that whole movement is going to have? Now, I know TTI has their own semiconductor side as well. But so what do you think that impact will be, and how soon will that be felt?
Yeah, I mean, I think that certainly it speaks highly of the investment that will continue to happen in semiconductor capital equipment spending over the coming years. And that, is another big area within the EMS. Many of the EMS have touted over the last, 8-10 quarters, the strength of that business as companies have been investing in new equipment and as they're building new wafer fabs, et cetera. And I think that CHIPS Act really just furthers that premise. And it's going to have impact, I think, significantly in the Americas. When I was in Europe, there was a lot of talk about the investment that the governments in Europe are going to be making in that area as well, because there is that concern about business continuity, supply chain disruption, having, all your eggs in one basket, so to speak. And so much of that wafer fab, et cetera, have been in Asia as in terms of a percentage, that I think the European and the North American teams are a little more nervous about that now, and certainly want to invest more to bring that business onshore where possible.
Yeah. Yeah. And what has to follow, and I know this isn't necessarily a business that the TTI serves, but it's impacted, or certainly the PCB Fabs, right? I mean, that's still very much an Asian-based activity. Actually, I spoke to my local Congress lady up here about that a month or so ago. And so I think there's movement even within Congress to try to incentivize more of that, which would be good. So especially with everything coming into Mexico, I always thought that's an ideal place for a fab, right? So
yeah, definitely. I think, in the same way that the supply chains grew up where the investments were being made and where all of the production was taking place, I think that same thing you'll see to continue to evolve, whether that is in Mexico or Eastern Europe or Southeast Asia. Those supply chains will continue to grow in those areas, and that's just creating opportunity.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Before we end, I'd be remiss if I didn't take advantage of speaking to somebody in your position and ask you to look into your crystal ball. And, we're hearing all these rumors about component challenges maybe starting to abate a bit, right? And, everybody earlier in the year was giving it a year or so. Now there's a little more optimism. We won't hold you to this, Michael, but what, in your view, how do you see this?
Yeah, it's a great question, and we get it frequently, right? I wish that I was far more intelligent than I am, because maybe I'd have a better answer for you. But my perspective on it, certainly my opinion, is that we've seen things start to stabilize some. We're really not seeing lead times come in dramatically at this point, but they're also not stretching out significantly anymore. Granted, they're at fairly extended levels and may stay that way for a while. I think the real question that's on everyone's minds right now is, how real is the backlog that so many companies have out there? And almost every OEM, EMS, distributor all say the same thing, and that's that they have record backlogs out there. And it ranges from 6 months to multiple years of backlog in some cases. But the real sort of question remaining is how real is the backlog, and will that come to fruition if the market starts to change to any degree? The macro economy is going to do something. We don't necessarily know whether that's going to be a soft landing, a hard landing, or what impact that has. But I think, from our perspective, just looking at it holistically, we think there's going to continue to be challenges. I think there's going to be some stops and starts and some bumpiness in the market in the months ahead. Overall, looking out at the balance of the decade in the 20s, though, we are extremely bullish on the electronics market. So many applications continuing to consume more and more quantities of electronics, and that's not going to change. So I think that we're all very positive on that front, and we'll have to deal with the bumpiness along the way.
Yeah, and I think that's what the last many years have taught us, is that it's this very odd industry in the world. The cycles we're getting and the disruptions come one after the other, and I'm still waiting to see what the disruption with what's going on around the island of Taiwan is, with planes and ships not able to transit for a few days at least, right? What impact is that going to have? And I don't,
That's another interesting one, right? Every day we wake up and you look at the paper as far as what's happened overnight, and it brings a new challenge into the supply chain. It's been a crazy run for a few years.
It's funny you say that. Somebody pointed out to me recently. They said, remember the whole Suez Canal when the thing, I said, yeah. They said, yeah, that seems so long ago, but it was just another one in a blip, a whole series of disruptions, right?
So, right. That's exactly it.
Yeah. Michael, I've enjoyed this very much. Thank you. This has been great to get to know you, to hear your side or your perspective on the industry. I hope we can do this again sometime in the future.
I do as well. Thank you very much for the time, Eric, and look forward to talking with you again.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.
Take care.